Thank you for tuning in once again to his Vine and Fig Tree podcast. My name is Kurt Olson and I'm your host. I'm coming to you on the early afternoon of January 7th, 2026. Three things really important. One just US focused, the other two you just can't stop talking about. And that is the situation in Venezuela from over the weekend and the events unfolding in Iran. Um, First, Venezuela. Um, the attack, or let's call it the operation. It's hard to call it an attack. An attack would assume that there's some kind of back and forth going on that is going to extend for a while. And the harsh reality is it didn't. Venezuela had Russian and Chinese defense systems. They completely failed. So, and I had talked in the lead up to what happened here that we had Venezuela doing business with the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, and the Cubans. And Venezuela and the communist leadership by both Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro had turned Venezuela into a country that the residents feared because of political oppression, because of an economy that was in shambles, because um, the lack of freedom. And in one fell swoop, things changed. And as much as I would have loved to have seen this process unfold with some kind of uh, approval by the Congress, constitutional action, the Team Trump latched onto some other means to do this and moved ahead. And this is very Reagan-esque activity that we saw. I mean, if you go back to the 1980s, and the world was very different then, because it was basically the Warsaw Pact, led by the Soviet Union, against the U.S. and the West, and that was what much of the world was focused on at that time. And there were times when Muammar Gaddafi in Libya did certain things that were against the United States, and in one occasion, Reagan just turned around and threatened him and his family physically. And this has a lot of behavior of no nonsense, we're not to be messed with kind of mentality. And we have had thousands, hundreds of thousands of families in the United States of America impacted by the opioid crisis, the fentanyl coming in through the southern border, courtesy the Chinese, the Venezuelans, and the Mexicans. And finally, someone did something about it. Now, I don't think it's going to end with just that action, but don't be surprised if there is details we learn of soon of a drop in opioid access in the United States. But the events in Venezuela have so many ripple effects because, I mean, last Sunday you saw the Chinese Foreign Ministry go ballistic because this crisis in Venezuela directly affects them. This crisis in Venezuela directly affects the Russians, and potentially how this conflict with Ukraine ends. This this conflict in Venezuela could ultimately impact the survival of the communist regime in Cuba. And in the description to this podcast, I will be sharing a reel, a Facebook reel from Glenn Beck, and he describes the extent to these ripple effects. And with all of the American media talking about oil and Americans getting access to it, the oil was not about us. The oil was about China, Russia, and Iran and others. And so um, the UN goes screaming on Monday, just 2 days ago, about what happened over the weekend in Venezuela. And you don't get a single peep from them, not a single peep from them about the human rights violations that are going on in Iran with the last vestiges of the Islamic regime leading in Tehran, trying to maintain their tentacles on power by shooting innocent civilians in various locations in the country. Um, and that's one of the things that is so telling here with both Venezuela and Iran. And I'm also going to share um, a brief segment of Bill Maher, and I'm not a huge Bill Maher fan, but when this lefty is right, I'm going to give him his credit. He's interviewing a Iranian woman who is an author, and she talks about how the Western left, and especially the American left, has betrayed women's rights. You go into Islamic countries, you go to Afghanistan, we had to insist that girls could be allowed to get educated. And there was a girl that was shot because of it. And women don't have a lot of rights in Islamic countries, and you would think that feminists in the United States and Europe would be running to their assistance, and they don't. And for many years, the morality police in Iran have run roughshod over females, young women, and women in their country, and it it it, it is an indictment on feminists in the United States of America for how they have ignored the plight of women in Iran and elsewhere in the Islamic world. And so I'll be sharing that, but plan on freedom coming to Iran. Seriously. We have the uh, Reza Pahlavi, uh, the relative of the former Shah. He's giving directions through social media to people in Iran, and there are people declaring allegiance to him right now. We're getting reports of the protesters having taken over certain cities. We have the next 24, 48 hours could be really critical to whether or not the people of Iran have a government that was what it looked like back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and whether the Islamic regime is going to continue. And meanwhile, we have American military personnel in the Middle East right now, and they are poised to do something. And I think they're poised to do something even with Israel. And that's what it looks like. That's what it's looking like a duck, walking like a duck, and talking like a duck. And at some point, you have to accept the fact that, wow, we could be doing something collectively here in Iran with the Israelis very soon. And if things get out of hand there, the word is we could respond pretty quickly. Um, and so it's so telling how the UN is now irrelevant, as we have seen them say nothing about Iran while things happened in Venezuela. And then the other exposure is simply the media. We have very little, if any, consistent reporting on the revolution unfolding in Iran in the legacy media in the United States of America. This is an indictment of their failure to accept reality. And you can be sure of one thing. If this was Gaza, if this was the Palestinians, this would be the only thing you'd be hearing about. And we have a genuine revolution happening among Iranians who a multitude of factors, the lack of freedom and economic chaos and a variety of other things, and freedom's at hand for these folks. And if you're a follower of Christ in the United States of America or anywhere in the West, anywhere around the world, these people should be prayed for, because they want freedom. They want freedom because the mullahs in Tehran were doing the exact opposite of freedom: oppression, uh, uh, clamping down, and violating human rights, things like that. And this is a very telling moment for the American media, Western media, and how they have been asleep at the switch on this for nearly 10 straight days. And 10, 11 days. I think we're headed toward day 11 is today. And this is really, really telling. And a world without Iran funding Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, whatever, however that gets pronounced, and a variety of other groups around the world. Wow. Just amazing. And and if this has a ripple effect toward events with Russia and Ukraine, because Russia was getting cheap oil from Venezuela, and as I'm sitting here taping this, we have the U.S. having uh, military having boarded a tanker that changed its flag from Venezuela to Russia, and trying to find out what's going on with that. So there's a bunch of things that are at play here, folks, that the world is changing before our very eyes. This is historic. This is a historic time. This is like the Berlin Wall coming down, and what we're seeing with the influence China and Russia have had in our own hemisphere, and also with various groups in the Middle East. But this is historic stuff, and I would encourage people to be alert and pay attention, and certainly be on X, because that's where you're finding out about this stuff. Um, the final thing I want to bring to your attention is just how I believe the fraud that we are seeing unfolding in Minnesota and slowly in other parts of the country, um, uh, Washington State, California. I, I would love to see the full accounting of the fraud that has unfolded in our welfare system. And when I say our welfare system, this is everything from food stamps, this is temporary relief to needy families, this is potentially disability income that people receive. Um, and obviously Medicaid, which is the healthcare program for the poor. I would love to see the bill that is actual dollars they know that are fraudulent, because I'm sure it's far higher than any of us would guess. And we have midterm elections this year. We're seeing signs that Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, has centrists in the GOP caucus that are unhappy with his leadership, and they want to go in another direction. Um, and he doesn't have a lot. There's not a lot of wiggle room there for Republicans to be doing this kind of stuff. And the reality is this: the fraud that is happening in the Somali community in Minnesota, and what could be going on in Ohio and Washington and California, Maine, and other locations, it's the tip of the iceberg. And if you are a voter, see, the thing that's so troubling about how the media is covering this right now is that they want the American people to believe that fraud is just baked in. It's just part of the it's just part of the loaf that comes from dealing with government, and we just need to accept it. No, we don't. I'm going to I'm going to relay something here that happened when my career was my career in journalism was far more uncertain. So I was working in Northeast Ohio in Cleveland, the eastern suburbs of Cleveland. I'd been there for nearly 15 years. And all of a sudden, there is the Great Recession happens. And for those who remember the Great Recession, you have mass chaos unfolding in the automobile industry. And of course, in terms of advertising, the newspaper industry relies very much on automobiles and the sale of automobiles and cars and car lots and car dealerships. So when all of that happened, it created dramatic change in the newspaper industry. I mean, I could tell a story that happened at the paper that I was at. I'm not going to do that. Uh, I'm going to try and stay above board on that. But it was it, serious debt, and I'll just leave it at that. And I was ultimately impacted by the change happening at that paper. And when all of these forces started unfolding here in the Great Recession, 2008 9, and I would ultimately lose my job in Northeast Ohio in late October 2009. Um, I remember, and I believe I told this to some of my colleagues. I said, we better hope that with some of these changes that are now happening in the newspaper industry, with less coverage of government and less focus on how government is spending money and what it's doing day to day. I remember telling people, We better hope that we are electing people of character and integrity to government, or government's going to turn into the Wild West. Well, I certainly don't call myself a prophet, but I believe my gut instinct that caused me to make that statement in 2009. I believe it's becoming a reality because we're seeing rampant fraud unfold, and this is the kind of stuff that should make the 26 midterm election historic. People should be thrown out of office for what was done. And folks, let's be clear. This stuff that is being talked about in Minnesota is not just Minnesota taxpayer dollars. This is federal dollars too. Because when you talk about the welfare system, when you talk about Medicaid, when you talk about food stamps, when you talk about other things, you're talking about federal dollars as well. This is the kind of stuff that should put voters in such a sour mood that they're ready to kick everybody out. They are ready to just kick people to the curb. That's how serious this is. And this, I believe, the stories of fraud. And as I'm sitting here taping this, we have hearings unfolding in the House of Representatives on the fraud that was happening in the Somali community in Minnesota. But this is nationwide. This is nationwide. And if we truly knew the amount of fraud that was happening, when we say fraud, we're talking about the waste of taxpayer dollars being used to scam the system or take advantage of the system. This is the kind of stuff, folks, that should just put voters in an angry mood, wanting people primaried so they can vote for other people to be on the ballot. And if incumbents get on the ballot in November, they are thrown to the curb. That's what this is all about. And in the coming weeks and months, we're going to see Team Trump and Republicans try to frame election 2026 in certain ways. But I'm telling you right now, fraud. Fraud is premier on the table and relevant. And as a taxpayer of the United States of America, if you can't wrap your mind around your dollars being used fraudulently across this country and it not put you in a mood of wanting to be a part of making a statement, then I don't know how I can help you. Seriously. This is as basic about voter activity as it can possibly get. My tax dollars are being wasted. I'm angry. The people responsible are thrown out of office. That's how that works. But full picture, these three issues, Venezuela and Iran, historic things are happening on the international stage, and you need to be paying attention to it. So that's all I have this week. In the description to the podcast, there's going to be a couple things that emerge there. That are both videos I would encourage you to watch. And until next time, God bless and goodbye.